about the situation in Pacifica. Can you give your point of view about this delicate issue?
Yes, well, some of it is speculation because I'm just going off of what other people have said, but it seems that Bill Crozier, who is acting as the interim director of the network, decided to fire Obadike over issues that have to do with financial problems in the network. And this is based on, I guess, what seems like an assumption that Larry Winters will be better at solving the financial problems. There are also social and cultural problems at KPFT, and Bill Crozier has greatly exacerbated them by alienating a bunch of people that thought that Obadike was doing a good job of turning the station around and knowing that it would be a gradual process. Bill Crozier has indicated that there were very imminent financial things facing KPFT, so some have even speculated that he's going to try to sell off the station and the frequency in order to get New York's Pacifica station out of debt, but I don't know enough about any of these finances. I'm just reading what people are publishing.
When you say a cultural difference, can you talk a little about this?
Yes, I think it's important to look at white supremacy as it is part not only of Trump and national politics or, the Ku Klux Klan or some group that says that they're white supremacists, but it also needs to be considered on the left. So KPFT is a left institution, but at the same time it's a business. At the same time, it has a white boss, basically, who's able to fire people. It has a white boss who's able to call the cops if those people say, you're firing me isn't even legal, and he says, well, I can call the cops and convince them that it is legal enough to get you out of here. So this is tapping into the power that white men have in our culture to be able to get law enforcement on their side and to be able to say, well, I'm the one who has the authority here, and have people believe them, or at least have the cops believe them. So, a lot of the legitimacy of Pacifica is based on the fact that it has volunteers working for it, and that it has people who are good at making news that are working for it, and then it has a lot of people that are people of color who are working. Many of them, most of them, are volunteers in the Pacifica network. So that gives a certain amount of legitimacy to what is basically a white-run institution to go and say, we're conscious of important things that are going on in our society, and we're on the side of peace and justice, and to prove it, we have all these people who are working as volunteers with us. Well, at some point, if the culture of how the thing is run resembles that of any other corporation or any right-leaning institution, then the fact that they talk about progressive politics on the air isn't particularly important anymore. I think, in general, that Pacifica has done a much better job of creating content than it has of administration. So I don't think that people, when they think of Pacifica, they think, oh, it's a very well-run system. No, that's certainly not what they think. They might think, oh, I like this show, I like this programmer, I like this content, but that nobody would think it's a particularly well-run institution.
So are you telling me that the best way to resolve the financial problems in Pacifica is to rebuild and remake, do better content?
No, I think that the financial problems, solving them at this late state when there are so many problems, I don't know what's going to be necessary to solve them, because I'm not really able to look at the books. I would say that fixing the administrative problems in the Pacifica network would make for better content, and the content is already what's the best thing about Pacifica. There might be other groups, other businesses where someone says, well, the best thing about this business is that they're very egalitarian towards their workers, and that people of color feel very comfortable there and don't feel that they're going to have the cops called on them. They don't feel like they're being treated as outsiders. But maybe the business is not doing anything particularly important, but it's just run well. Well, that's not the case at Pacifica. The best thing that Pacifica Network does is creating content, and the administrative side has been sorely lacking for decades.
Since you are as a volunteer in Pacifica Radio, did you see any financial books? What do you think about the administration, the transparency about the administration? Do we have the right to know about it in detail?
Well, there's two questions. I mean, legally, what rights we have to see financial books, I couldn't tell you. I don't know enough about the bylaws or the laws governing corporations like the Pacifica Network to comment on that. I would say, though, that if you're going to have any institution where some people are getting paid and some people are just volunteers, and the people who are getting paid are getting paid pretty well, they're not just being paid, a little stipend or transportation money or something like that, but they're actually being paid well and getting benefits, then you have inherent problems in that some of the folks are going to think, well, I'm doing an awful lot of work and not getting paid, and meanwhile this guy's doing some amount of work and maybe not even doing as good of a job as I am, and they are getting paid, so there's going to be a certain feeling of injustice. So one of the ways to deal with that is to go in the route towards transparency, and I think that that's the best way to go. So if I was somebody that said, if in my band, for example, I told the guys in my band, hey, you guys come and rehearse for a couple hours a week, play a couple shows a week, but I'm going to be spending, every week I'm going to be spending 15 hours producing, booking shows. I'm going to be spending 15 hours that you guys aren't spending doing all this stuff, and therefore I would like to be paid in an entirely different way than the rest of you are paid. It could work. But it would entail me, the best way to do it would be to be very transparent, would be to say, I'm taking this many dollars a week out of our collective money or out of wherever, and this is what you're getting for it. And I think that you can have a situation where some people are working or some people are getting paid more than others because they're doing more work, but transparency is what helps everyone feel like, okay, this is cool, like, I don't want to do all that work. I'm glad somebody else is doing it, and they should get paid for it, and that's fine with me.
I see. Nick, what do you think is happening in real terms? What do you think is happening behind all this conflict, especially yesterday? Do you think it's that somebody's making specific plans that we don't know? I mean, the volunteers, the activists, what's going on behind of this?
Well, I think that if you're a general manager at KPFT, as Dwayne Bradley was for so many years, and you want to keep your job, and you want to be rewarded for doing your job, there are some things that there are different ways that you could go about it. So one of them would be to say, I'm going to just be very hardworking and get results kind of manager, and everybody's going to appreciate me, and so I'll keep my job because I'm well liked. Another way to go about it would be to say, well, who can actually fire me? Okay, I could be fired either this way or this way, and the main way to avoid being fired is to make sure that I have enough people who support me on this board, the local board or the national board or whatever it is. And so my job is really to make sure that I have a certain amount of control of this board, the people that support me, and then I'm okay. So I don't really need to put as much time into whatever it is, fundraising or developing new shows or whatever. What I need to do is have friendly faces on the board. And I think to some extent there's a concern among a lot of the volunteers at KPFT that the manager has focused too much on having control over the ways that he might be fired or otherwise punished. I mean, there's also lawsuits that could happen. So controlling the information, controlling the board is easier than just doing doing a job,
Oh,
doing his job very well. It's easier to just, and this is something that we see all through our society. So if you have a school, their ability to get funding and their ability to continue to exist is going to be based on these test results. So they could say, well, we're just going to educate our children really well and hope that they do well on the tests. Or they can basically say, we're going to help the kids cheat on the test because all that controls our income is how well they do on these tests. So we don't really need to bother being great teachers. We need to, teach kids how to cheat on the tests. So I think that you have that way of short-circuiting the feedback mechanisms in politics and in corporations and at Pacifica, where you can say, well, instead of just doing a great job, I'm going to focus on controlling the things that could get me fired or could lose my funding or something like that. And sometimes that means going about it in a manner that is, in this case, racist. You have a racist act of calling the cops on people that are working hard, for the station. And I don't think that anybody doubts that Obadike was in good faith working hard for the station. I don't know any other way to describe it other than this is a racist act of firing him, and it appears racist to so many people, and therefore it would be the job of a good executive director to make sure to do things that don't even seem racist because you're working at a progressive station, and even the appearance of racism is a problem. And clearly, when you're calling the cops out to escort people who are part of your team out of the building, then and those people are people of color, it just it goes beyond just looking bad. I mean, this is
Yes.
something that is truly repugnant.
Yeah. Do you think that yesterday is a symbol that we shouldn't forget in the future? I mean, 10 policemen, 3 people fired, activists angry. How you interpretize that picture? What's happened yesterday in Pacifica Radio?
Well, I think that at some point, people are going to say, well, okay, apparently these white supremacist kind of tendencies are so deep within our organization, and these people are so entrenched, whether it be Dwayne or Bill or anyone else, that why are we putting our energy into it? They're deriving legitimacy. They're deriving the content that we generate. They're getting all kinds of benefits. What are we getting? Well, we're being treated terribly. So at some point, people are going to say, well, I don't want to be part of this sinking ship. I'm going to put my energy elsewhere. And I believe that it was on KPFT, if you listen on Sunday nights, Self-Determination and other shows talking about people of color, black people, withdrawing their energy and their finances from white supremacist systems. Instead of fighting the white supremacist systems, we're going to withdraw is one of the things that you hear being talked a lot about. And I think people of color may look at Pacifica after a number of years and say, well, why did we exempt them from this? Why did we treat them as a special place? No, they are also a white supremacist institution, and it's important for us to withdraw our time and energy from this project and create our own projects. And it may mean that there are spaces that are led by people of color, and that the contributions of white people will come in the form of support instead of being the people who are always in charge of everything. And I think that that's a better model, where you don't have, these people that are just acting like they're in any corporation where the white men are on top and everybody else kind of has to do whatever they say. And I think that Pacifica doesn't, at least KPFT, doesn't really get a pass anymore. Nobody's going to say, well, there's this one way that we treat city and corporate institutions as being not is they don't care about us, so why are we giving them our time and energy? And to some extent, people have been saying, well, KPFT is special. They're about peace and justice, and they're anti-racist, so we should still give them our energy. Well, at some point, people are going to say that they simply don't deserve our energy.
That the activists and the social organizations in Houston, are we losing space after yesterday? I mean,
well, I think that free speech to me is not a goal. Free speech is a right, and it has a legal meaning. But to me, the goal of a peace and justice organization should be to resist a brutal system that we have based on white supremacy, racism, sexism, and money, and war, and incarcerating people, and it's a brutal system. And I think that that left institutions, when they're doing well, are finding a way to bring people together and oppose that kind of machine. And I think that Pacifica has been aspiring to be one of those types of resistance institutions, and yeah, I think that after what happened yesterday, one could say, well, they're failing. They're not doing the hard work of uprooting entrenched white supremacy that is within so many white people. I mean, if I worked with Bill Crozier for decades, I never had any issue where I thought, this guy has some white supremacist tendencies or something like that. I never had a thought like that for a second. But, when push comes to shove and finances are on the line and everything else, it's kind of like this sudden idea of, well, the solution is get rid of Obadike and put Larry Winters in there. It's like, I can't imagine any rationale for that other than a white supremacy and corruption.
I see, Nick. Let me ask you one question. I shouldn't ask you that, but do you think that conflict can escalate? I mean, can be a little violent in the future, in the short future?
Well, sure. I mean, I think that when you have the police coming to the station to escort volunteers out of there, then the violence has already begun. And, that there could be more violence in the future, of course. In general, when I'm in a group, I try to say, let's have an agreement here that we're not going to use violence or threats of violence on each other. And that's kind of an important way to start working together. So if somebody starts acting violently or threatening violence on other members of the group, well, they're clearly not part of our group anymore. And when you call the cops on somebody, it's it has a lot. Except in I can imagine a circumstance in which calling the cops on somebody isn't an act of violence. If somebody is using the cops as a self-defense from an attack going on, of course. But in this case, like having peaceful people removed from the building by police, that is an act of violence.
Yeah, I don't know, but I get the feeling that somebody's putting the finger in a very sensitive place of the activists in Houston. But I hear it's in another Pacifica radios, like it's in Los Angeles or at the other one. I think it's in Chicago. I'm not sure. They're having the same problems. I mean, they're having problems like that. Looks like it's not only Houston. Did you hear something about it?
Well, I think the answer to that is that we have long seen on the left that there have been forces undermining us, and a lot of them are internal. So, I mean, you have people that really think that they're good at telling other people what to do, and that's what they want to do. I think that some of them are external, and the external ones include actual disinformation and disruption campaigns. So we know that the FBI was involved in disrupting the work of Martin Luther King and all kinds of other groups, even down to little community food co-ops and other things like that. FBI was willing to disrupt all kinds of groups. And then there's something kind of in between those two things. So I talked about leftist individuals kind of disrupting groups and then the government. But in between that, you just have a culture of white supremacy, which is disruptive in itself. You have a culture of capitalism, which is disruptive in itself. So, for example, you have people that are going to be in any left institution who say, well, I'm putting a lot of time and energy into this. I could be putting my time and energy into the corporate world and making a lot more money, but I deserve some money for my work here because my time and energy is important, and that's an understandable tendency. But within capitalism, there's a lot of the culture of selfishness is such that people are going to constantly move to strengthen their hands and to get more money and to do better for themselves, and corruption is all through capitalism and through other types of governments as well. And so I like how the Zapatistas say that corruption is really the elephant in the room. When you're talking about socialism, communism, capitalism, corruption is always there. So the Zapatistas have a saying where they say, for ourselves, nothing, for everyone, everything. This is a fundamental Zapatista maxim about corruption, and it applies to any type of government. It applies to any type of group. And if that is your way of approaching things, for ourselves, nothing, for everyone, everything, then you're holding yourself up to a very high standard, and that can be very helpful for, I think, for watching out for the way that corruption tends to creep in. So if in an organization you have one person who goes around doing things that raise a lot of money for the organization, and you have other people that do things that don't directly raise money for the organization, the money raiser guy is going to start to think, well, you know what, I'm pretty good at this money raising thing, and they need me because of the money, and I should get a little cut here. You know, this is a natural aspect of organizations in our society, and so we're talking about just corruption, the tendency towards corruption, and it's something that you have to be aware of. Where you can't say, oh, well, we're going to run the KPFT radio for decades, and there's some corruption going on, but we're not really going to talk about it and think about it. If you don't have a constant dialogue around corruption and corrupting forces, then it's just going to grow and undermine things like a cancer.
Well, Nick, I think I don't want to take more of your time. Thank you for sharing your experience. Like always, you always share your analysis. Well, I hope, and I'm sorry you're not in Houston right now. We miss you here, and thank you.